By Glenn Clark at the Redlands Camp Farthest Out in 1950.
As you look around, you'll find many of you are here for the first time. How many of you are here for the first time? The first Camp Farthest Out. How many have been to Camps Farthest Out before? I'd say it's half and half. So the first two talks I'm going to give are going to be somewhat along old lines that some of you may have heard, and then I'm going to break into new ideas that I've been gathering around the world. For, as Marge said, it'd be nice to have this field, but we had this field in Cairo. We went there, didn't know anyone. Before I knew it, I was hustled to the biggest Christian church in Africa. Over 1,500 of them were men wearing fezzes. 500 were women. We found in Egypt the men carried on the religious life much more than the women. We found that was true in many lands. And we found other places where we had great crowds. If we put them all together, there's no place, no auditorium in America would hold them all if we could get them all together. But we'll tell a little bit of those things as we go along. Now, as you look out upon yourselves, you may think that this is rather a mediocre-looking group of people. A woman came to Camp Farthest Out, a very swanky lady, and she, at the end of the third day, in fact, she sort of ran the social life of St. Paul. Friends of the people were surprised to see her there. Before it was over, she said, at the end of the first day, I never thought there's so many mediocre people all together in one place before. At the end of the third day, I thought I'd never been among such wonderful people. I wondered how I even deserved to be there. And after that, she dropped all her 400 swanky friends. That is, instead of going to those parties and cocktail parties, she just, her eagerness was to get groups of folks that were on the beam together. There was a man in the backwoods of Tennessee, couldn't read or write, didn't know much about anything that was civilized, and he went to a village store in the little town, and for the first time he found a mirror, and he'd never seen one before, and he picked it up and he was enthralled. He kept muttering to himself, so, well, that's old Pappy, there's old Pappy. So he bought the mirror and took it home, and he didn't want his wife to know how a homely man his old Pappy had been, so he kept it hid out in the barn under the straw. Every spare moment he'd get, he'd go out and take a look at old Pappy. His wife, after a while, noticed he was spending a lot of time out there, so when he was away, she slipped out there and looked around, and finally she found this mirror, and she picked it up and took a good look, and she said, and so that's the old hag he's been spending so much time with. Now, when you get your sights adjusted in about 3 days, you're going to see some wonderful people. And yet you may not know it, but it'll be partly a reflection of the Christ Spirit in you. As we gather here, we ought to take a little inventory of what we brought. I just told you what I brought, not any of it belonging to myself, but I also, 30 years ago, I brought some old cares and fears and tensions with me. I carried them around. I was wondering how many of you here carry around some old tensions. Put your hands up. How many of you carry around some old fears? How many of you carry around some, half-hidden resentments? Put your hands up. How many of you have suffered illness in your life, serious illness? Put your hands up. I want to see all the hospital cases. How many of you have suffered great bereavement, very deep sorrows? Put your hands up. Now, I might ask, how many of you have committed some sins, but I won't believe I'll ask that. Some of you will want to put up 2 hands and money of your life. But this inventory we've taken has been a collection of our power. If I were given the choice of all the wealth of the world or all the wistfulness, I would select the wistfulness. The wistfulness of the folks over in Formosa, never knowing where they would be, what might happen next. Only 6 minutes away, bombers could come over from the mainland. We found perhaps the greatest witness all out at the leper, 2,000 leper folks. And as we went out and spoke there, here they were. Sunday morning I addressed them, and here in the central aisle were soldiers, Chiang Kai-shek soldiers, who were hopeless leprosy cases. There was about 25 of them, formed a male choir with costumes, white costume. And over here, beautiful girls, just as beautiful as fine, but in blue costumes, furnished a women's choir. And they sang these choirs, and they did a wonderful mothering of Lillian Dixon, whom I will mention someday, is the one who brought the gymnasium to McAllister College. They have ceased committing suicide and are finding a joy in the Lord. But there's a deep wistfulness. I felt tremendous power in that group. Now, wherever there's this wistfulness in you folks, those of you who've suffered bereavement and have loved ones in heaven, you're the ones that are bringing the greatest power to these gatherings. And some of you who have committed sins may be bringing great power. Star Daly, 14 years in penitentiaries and chain gangs as a dynamo of power. I heard a minister once tell how good he was. He had never smoked or drank. He had never played cards or gone to a movie or a theater, never had danced, never had read any novels, and I never heard such an anemic sermon in all my life. I thought if I'd have to hear this man on next Sunday, I hope he'll go out and rob a bank next week and then ask forgiveness and get forgiven and come in with a new grasp on the realities. Now, we don't have to go and commit any sins. What I'm telling you is you've got enough of them. We're just going to dump the whole thing and all your needs, all your weaknesses, all your troubles into a great big bonfire. Better shovel it down into the furnace, and it's going to create the power. It's going to start up here in about 3 days from now. You're going to find the power here is so tremendous that all our problems can be solved, and we're going to solve some national and international problems because we have lines out all around the world. Just received a letter day before yesterday from Captain Fushida, who led the attack on Pearl Harbor. I think another year, I'm not sure, but next time I come out here to Redlands, I think I'd like to have him share as one of the leaders in the camp farthest out, the man who found Jesus. I just received a letter from, before I started on this journey, from Senator Carlson asking me to address the Senate breakfast group the next time I'm in Washington. I couldn't do it last year, but I hope to next year. All I'm saying is I hope that what we're doing here is going to find ramifications all around the world, for we have met all the greatest spiritual souls around the world, and many of them were folks in high offices, and very high positions. Princess Wilhelmina had us spend the morning with her in Holland, in her castle. First time I ever went into a castle, and had the doors open like in the fairyland, and men in waiting and women in waiting guide us. And we thought we were talking to Louise Eggleston. She was just that close to us and right in behind us and all these things. I won't go on into those details, but all I'm saying is that we're going to start with ourselves, and we're going to start where we're at the weakest. 30 years ago, I went to the greatest nerve specialist in the Northwest and asked him to examine me and see why I was just 1/3 efficient. And he made a very careful examination, and he ended up by saying, you've inherited your mother's nervous organism, and you don't have any business teaching. You'll be all right if you'll content yourself with your limitations and plan never to do more than, undertake more than 1/3 of a man's work the rest of your life. I took a half year off. I took him out to California to finish a textbook on the short story. That was my excuse. My real reason was to find God. And I found him in a little verse in the Bible, commit thy ways unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he will bring it to pass. And I said, you be my senior partner, Lord. You look after results, and I'll just look after the intentions. I came back, and I I gave no concern about the results, and I saw that my intentions were all right, and then I went into each class and had all the fun I could have in the world. Every class was just like a party. When the day was over, I hadn't done any work. I'd just been going to parties all day, so I sat down to do a little work, but I had some writing an article. I had so much fun doing it that was play, too. I had so much fun, the Atlantic Monthly accepted it. And then in the evening, the Methodists wanted me to tell them my secret, and the next night the Presbyterians, and after a while I found I was giving about 8 lectures a week. I was doing full-time preaching and full-time teaching and full-time writing. I was doing 3 men's work instead of a third of a man's work. So I hurried around to the great nerve specialist to tell him this new secret, and his secretary said he died while you were gone. I didn't get back in time to save his life, so I'm coming here to save your lives. Well, now, the next year, this textbook came out. The next year, all the universities and colleges of California, but one, adopted this, my book on the short story. I don't know if any time in history has any textbook been so widely adopted in any state. As the colleges started earlier than they do in the Middle West, I came out here with my family that summer, and I went around and visited some of those colleges. I felt rather strange, rather a young man, over 30 years ago, going into a classroom in the University of California, and the classes, there were about 300 in every class, and seeing the way that the professor was using my textbook. And as I went around to Redlands here, Pomona, all these colleges, I felt as though a little bit like President Eisenhower coming in, and I really had become known. But the point I was getting at was this. The reason I'm telling you about this is this. It wasn't just a passage in the Bible, for I have found the way to get hold of these things is take the Bible in one hand and some spiritual book in the other, some contemporary book. That's what led me to writing some contemporary books, hoping that perhaps I will lift up mine eyes in the Bible, and between the two you may get something, or take Frank Laubach's Prayer, the Greatest Thing in the World, and the Bible. And I found a book called Metaculture by Dr. Horace Fletcher, the man who put the word Fletcherize into the dictionary. He was visiting a friend one evening who'd made a lifelong study of Oriental philosophies, and he told of a Buddhist sect in Japan who believed you could take your angers and your fears and pull them out by the roots, and go through life without fears or angers. Dr. Fletcher resolved that if a foreigner could do that, and if a Buddhist could do that, a Christian should. So he walked the streets of Boston that night until he had resolved that in his mind, and he persistently got right after angers and fears. And it left a vacuum, and in that vacuum came a peace and a poise, an efficiency and a power that made him the greatest physician in America. And he was in demand everywhere. And one of the calls came to be, you have to catch the train, and he being so busy, he just left at the last moment to catch it. He could have made it, but his materials were not there, his instruments. And while waiting for those, the train pulled out. The red cap came up with his suitcases and all perspiring and disturbed, filled with concern because he'd been caught in a jam and he couldn't get through. But Dr. Fletcher took it so calmly. He said, "That's all right. You did your best," and he insisted on tipping him. The red cap insisted on taking care of his materials. He said, "There won't be another train, though, to that station for 24 hours. That's all right." The next day, when Dr. Fletcher got on the train, he had in his pocket a newspaper that told how the train he had missed had run into a wreck, and 2 had been killed and 20 had been injured. Well, this trip I was making around these colleges, 2 years after this book came out, led me to make some close connections, so I hurried down to the railway station in San Francisco and said, I want a ticket on the fast train that leaves at 9 o'clock and reaches Los Angeles at 9 tomorrow morning. It would make perfect connections with the reservations we had on the Northern Pacific, I believe, the Union Pacific. It would get us back in St. Paul in time for the opening of school. I believe we arrived at 9 and we'd leave about 11. The ticket agent said, you're new to California, aren't you? And I said, yes, you've got a wonderful climate out here. He said, I'm not referring to climate, I'm referring to this train. You don't know that this is the most popular train on the Pacific coast. I said, no, that's fine. I love to ride on popular trains. He said, no, you've got to get your tickets 2 weeks in advance this time of the year if you want to ride on that train. We call it Pilar. I said, well, then just sell me a coach ticket. It's just a sleeper. Well, sell me standing room. We don't sell it. Well, I saw then all my careful plans were all falling to pieces. So I went in and sat in the station and looked up at the clock, and I saw I had 15 or 20 minutes to worry, which I would have done ordinarily. But I had done what Dr. Fletcher had done. If he had done that, I said, I'll pull these out by the roots. And so I pulled my angers and my fears out, and I made a great discovery. That anger is the parent of all the masculine vices, and fear the parent of all the feminine vices. And when you really pull those pop and mom out, you pull out all the little babies and youngsters and grandchildren and uncles and aunts, and you really just cleared of a lot of things. And it was the shortest cut I've ever found, and I recommend it to you tonight. When you go to bed tonight, you just say, Lord, you take a good hold of those angers way down in my subconscious and my fears, and you just yank them out carefully, pull them out by the roots, don't leave anything, during my sleeping time tonight. Well, there I was. What should I worry about? Well, that train probably would run into a wreck. 2 would be killed and 20 would be injured, so I'd better pray for the unfortunates who bought the tickets. After I'd prayed long enough to save their lives, I thought, now what else could happen? Coolidge was president. Herbert Hoover was Secretary of Interior, of Commerce. He was home for the summer at Palo Alto, and I said, now, if I wait here long enough, Herbert Hoover may come in and sit down beside me. Someday I know he's going to be president. And if he got a chance to get really well acquainted with me, I'm sure he'd appoint me as Secretary of State. Well, I looked around, no portly gentleman was coming in. Then presently I heard the call, last call for the Southern Pacific, all points south, Los Angeles, and so on. And I went up to the station in the window and said, by any chance, has a reservation been turned in? He said, yes, a lower, just turned in. I'm so glad you were here. I wouldn't want that train to go with an empty berth. And so because I was new to California that night, I saved this Southern California the price of a berth that night. Now, I have found when I get rid of angers and fears, it creates a situation that's conducive to bringing in the cargoes. Our cargoes come to us over calm seas. If you could just go with a spirit of inner serenity, based on the fact that we've pulled out our angers and fears and let something else come in, which would be love and trust and Jesus Christ himself, then we would be amazed to find how we would avoid automobile accidents. We would avoid mistakes in business judgment. We wouldn't get cancer or TB because you have nothing but love in your system and trust. You have a power, something there, one of the most powerful forces in the universe in this matter of love. I'm going to give you a definition here that we'll use all this week. Love is the power that brings everything into perfectly adjusted and harmonious relationship with everything else. That's true of ideas, of people, and of things. I didn't see anybody pounding anybody or slapping anybody as you came into this theater. I'm assuming that everyone here is in perfectly adjusted and harmonious relationship with everyone else. I was told I slept in a room with Kenneth Grable last night. His wife warned me about his snoring. All that I got was the sweetest little rumble that just put me to sleep and kept me to sleep. And the perfect harmony and adjustment was so marvelous that I couldn't have asked for anything better. In other words, you can't very well find anything that'll bother you, and you may find some of those things you may have to adjust if you have certain roommates. But I have found that my ideas begin to come in perfect sequence and order, just the ideas that bring blessing and help to others, if I approach that person with nothing but love. I wouldn't know how to meet a situation at all, but if I could meet them with love. We have found that in my office, my company, if there's discard, the business, the sales, if there's discard in the office, the sales from outside go down. If there's harmony, they come up, just like a barometer. Glenn Harding used to say that whenever he and his wife have a little quarrel, one of their three boys would always get a cold. It just reflects. You can't tell how fast those things work. And so there was one woman we had in our Mac pub that just would go into tantrums at times, especially when I was away. She wouldn't show that side, but when I was away, the manager would say this for a solid week. She hasn't spoken to anyone. And it just creates an atmosphere. Why, it's just like a tension. It's just terrific. You would just have to fire her if she doesn't fit here. And so when I came back, I called her into my office, and I said that she didn't seem to fit in with the requirement of our company. We didn't care how efficient. We'd stand a lot of inefficiency if they have this inner efficiency. But then she went in, not into tantrum, but into hysterics, saying that at her age she'd never get a job. It'd just be like putting her out on the street, and she just begged and begged, and I, big-hearted Glenn, let her stay then on this condition, that if she had any other tantrum, that would just have to be automatically leave. Well, it went along pretty well. Perhaps she had some insight, but she didn't show it. But she fell off of a chair and broke her leg. And of course, it's in the hospital, and had all this set and everything, and our salary went on, and my employees are insured, so all the bills were paid. But then we looked in and found that she'd been sending duns to people who'd already paid. All the folks, subscribers that hadn't paid, and they like to have had their horizons, I think, stopped. She was sending it almost against their will without sending any bills. We just saw that she simply was a round peg in a square hole. Well, after she was out the hospital and was back at her home, her apartment, I rode over, and all the way I just let love go ahead. Just nothing but love. Just love. I went in and sat down and found out very tenderly, talking with her, how she's getting along. I was glad she was recovering so fast. And then with this whole atmosphere of love all around, I began to talk, saying almost good-naturedly as I could, that you're a round peg in a square hole. And since you've been gone, we find there's one taking your place and found a lot of things that rather proves to me that you really just don't fit there. I don't think you really are happy in that work. And I know you could get a position where they pay you better, so let's pray about it. And we prayed, and she's perfectly happy. She got a position that paid better, and everything worked out just fine. But I found that if you can just take anger and fear out, if I'd gone over there with a lot of anger or fear, just knowing that she was going to rebel, then I have a hard fight. It might have created it. But without any rhyme or reason, just send love out. Go into a place, and you see what Jesus meant when he said, when you're called into judgment, take no anxious thought what you shall say. It'll be given you in that hour. Just seek first the kingdom and its righteousness. Get in that atmosphere. And so you can see what began to happen with me when I pulled out these things. It left a vacuum. And in came Jesus himself had a chance at last to get in. I was in Palestine just a few months ago, and I saw the area there where there's an inn that was so full Jesus couldn't come in, and we went down into the cave where it had been empty enough, just a few animals, simple creatures, and there was room for Jesus to be born. So this first night I suggest we start a prayer that the Lord will take out all these vices, all these blockages, and make us clear channels for Jesus just quietly come in tonight and take control. Just take complete control. You may not realize how anger does this, But there's so many New England conscientious folks in this northern area of the United States that are so conscientious that they feel they haven't done their daily duty if they haven't done some worrying. My own wife is that New England type. She didn't feel she had really done a faithful day's work if she had a lot of worry, and she'd come to greet me when I came home from school with a long face and begin to worry about this and that. And I've seen little children come running and dancing up and down when you come in, and little dogs even wag their tail and show their joy, and somehow you could know that little dog loved you. You know that little child loved you, but even your wife, you don't know if she loves you, she doesn't have any room for love right there. Fear just blocks it. It's there, but it isn't coming out. Well, I love to help my wife, and she was frail, and before the babies came, when we used to have college girls help us, I would help her wipe the dishes while she washed them. And during the meals, very often, she would start, nearly always, telling about how financially, how poor we were, and what would happen if anything happened to me, because she's frail, couldn't have strength enough to support the family. And we'd argue, and she always won the arguments because she had more grounds for it. She was an optimist. She was a pessimist, and I was an optimist, naturally. And an optimist is one who sees an opportunity in every difficulty. A pessimist is one who sees a difficulty in every opportunity. Another definition of a pessimist is one who has to live with an optimist. So that's one reason I think she was getting more pessimistic, the blander I got about all these things that I really should, as a good conscientious Presbyterian elder, ought to worry about. You don't make a good Presbyterian elder unless you have a long face and worry a lot. That was my impression. So one day she was worrying. I took a cup, a perfectly fine 5-cent cup. I bought it for 5 and 10. Took it over to the draining board and smashed it. And she screamed. I took the biggest piece and smashed it. And then the next, although every time punctuated by a scream from her. She said, "What are you doing, Glenn?" I said, "I'm a man of opulence. I have abundance, and I can always support this family. So every time you worry, I'm going to break a cup." Well, she didn't worry for 3 days, and then she started in, and I took another cup, started over to the draining board, and she said, I'll be good. And I made one discovery, that 5 cents worth of action is worth more than $100 worth of argument. And she said, "Glenn, you should have been a caveman long before. And there's some things we really ought to be vigorous about, step out on, and just let folks drop their angers, laugh it all away, drop your fears, laugh them all away, and then just put yourself in the hands of God and see what happens." Well, anger I found is very simple to get rid of, because to me, everybody was a perfect being in a perfect world governed by a perfect God. And the bad things were merely wrong Victrola records put on them. I wouldn't smash a phonograph made carefully in the factory just because it had the wrong record. There's a British captain, best shot in the British Army in India, was informed one night that the Bengal tiger had carried his little baby away, and the Indians with their torches and searchlights were all ready to go in pursuit. And he hurried out with them, and they overtook the creature at the edge of the jungle. It lay there with its eyes reflecting the lights about 200 yards away, and the young captain knelt down, took careful aim, and he could see by the lights that the little baby had been unharmed, had been gathered up by the folds of his garment, and it was rather playing with a big pussy cat. Its head is so close to the tiger's head. There's a question whether his shaking hand would shoot the baby or the tiger. The others remonstrated, asked them to let them shoot, and he said, "No, I'm the only sure shot." And his hand was still trembling when he pulled the trigger, but by good fortune he killed the tiger and missed the child. One day my wife had taken a little 1-year-old to the doctor and left me with a little 3-year-old, Helen May, and she went into a tantrum. And I didn't know anything about tantrums. I tried to scold her and beg her to stop, but I couldn't. My sisters had all had very even dispositions and never had tantrums. I'm quite sure this was a maiden aunt on the mother's side that had inherited this from. And then I got ready to bat her ears down or shake her till her little new teeth rattled out. And then it dawned on me, am I going to hit the tiger or the baby? And I took careful thought, and then I prayed a little, then I went to the telephone and pretended to dial the neighbors, Mrs. Carpenter, whose little 2-year-old, 3-year-old, Mary Carpenter, was the best pal and playmate of Helen May. And I'm pretending, I was talking through a dead phone, but I was putting on a big show. I said, Mrs. Carpenter, is my sweet little Helen May over there? Well, you look around. I think you'll find her playing with your little Mary. Yes, you know my Helen May. She's a sweet little girl. She never cries. She minds her daddy. When her mama's away, she especially kind of looks after the house. And, I just praised way up. The crying stopped, but the mouth remained just as wide open. She was just staring at me. And then some little hands were jerking in my coattails, and a little voice was saying, Daddy, I's here, Daddy. Oh, Mrs. Carpenter, my dear little girl's come back, and you won't need to look any longer. 30 years have elapsed, and she's never had another tantrum. I hit the tiger, and I didn't hit the baby. No scars were left. I have had a stream of persons come to me for advice who have scars because the father or the mother or somebody missed the tiger and hit the little girl. One is getting ready to coin a knee of one of the handsomest, most beautiful young women I think I ever saw, has an appointment from Koinonia to go to Karaka, to go to Pakistan. And she said she couldn't go out there until she had solved one thing. She thought maybe I could solve it. She said, you've been a kind father. And I said, I've hoped to be, and I've had a kind father of my own. She said, my father hated all the religious views of my mother and myself. I don't have any clear impression of a loving Heavenly Father until I can somehow do something to erase those scars, that bitterness and cruelty of my father. That saved the company $600,000 a year. Then these two old men died, and the son of one of them came in. And he, after a while, he went around and said down to the older men, I'm getting rid of you. We're going to put in new blood. My brother-in-law begged to have 2 more years there because he said, I'm working out an invention that's going to help the company greatly. No, we can get along all right. And he gave him a pension of $50 a month. And then after a few years later, he sent word that the company's income had fallen down so much with this new blood, using their best men, you see, that we'll have to stop sending you the gratuity. I don't know of anything that hurts our capitalistic system and drives people towards socialism and communism so much as where the directors of companies fail in those Christian virtues. A man who'd saved them $600,000 a year for all those years was now, instead of the pension, called the pensions that should have been called a gratuity, a little, we're giving you a tip, we have to stop the tip. And he died of cancer. I asked my sister if there had been an injustice done to him, and he said, yes, I'm sorry to say there was. And she told me about this, and she said, now, and then Ray said to me, we mustn't tell folks about this. We'll just try to forgive him. But you know, when you get that, something like that inside, and it's the sweet and lovely people that won't tell it out, that too polite and gentlemanly and ladylike, those are they're the ones that get cancer. If he'd let it all out in profanity, he'd have died of apoplexy. McCarthy will die of apoplexy someday. He'll never die of cancer because he pours it all out. But now when we're dealing with these unseen things like angers and fears, we're dealing with the greatest realities there are. They're not the tangible things outside, lions and tigers. If a lion came here, you'd be perfectly safe. Every woman here would scream, and it would just go out the first exit you'd find. But mosquitoes, little almost invisible things, killed 2 million people every year from malarial mosquitoes. From malaria, we slept half the time in under mosquito netting as we traveled around the world. And germs, they're still smaller than mosquitoes. You can't see them by accepting through a microscope. They kill 20 million people, where mosquitoes kill 1 million. And then anger and fear, you can't even see those under a microscope, and they kill far more than bacteria. Far more. Say, who's regulating this? If you, have you been able to hear before?
Yes.
Did it just go down?
It's gone down, come up again.
I see. I'll tell you another night, I think you'd better to get back in here. That's better, isn't it? And by the way, I'll speak here tomorrow night, and Norman Elliott will speak here the night after. We're going to announce to the evening guests, some come in just for the evening, but come in early enough in the afternoon to hear Ethel Banks, who will speak in the afternoon, and also have an evening meeting, I think, sometime. We want to get those times adjusted. Well, those are these are the strange things, that these invisible things are really the things to deal with, and we discovered that wherever they use the invisible things of Jesus' method around the world, there was no communism at all. In India, Gandhi liberated 1/5 the human race from the greatest empire ever lived by what? By taking the Sermon on the Mount in one hand and the Bhagavad Gita in the other. He has a disciple called Vinoba, who is getting folks to give out of love their land, get millions of acres, and if they give it enough, fast enough through love, there'll be no chance for communism to come in. Wherever, the only places where communism has been taken hold and fought has been a place like Indochina, where our so-called Christian nations, France, for instance, refused to give up from their independence all that time. I can go down. I'm writing a book about this. It is so sound. This whole thing is just got it on that one inner plane. You're just as safe against communism, but the way our governments have failed to practice so-called Christian nations are the ones that have failed the most. I found down there in that Buddhist country of Burma, they used... Turn it up. I found that far more communists there than there were in Indochina, and it was all swept out. But in Indochina, they used all the selfish methods of suppression and so on. I won't go into detail on that. I'm just pausing a moment. However, I found that this matter of these unseen things, Jesus let his disciples sometimes eat with unwashed hands. They put their hands right in the food in Jesus' day. In India, they all ate without with their hands. They would wash them thoroughly before a meal, and there they were. They just stir the soup around, push the rice in, and just ladies, the most refined ladies, there would be 100, all of them sitting in the floor eating, and Roland, Marcia, and I, and perhaps some missionaries sitting at a table with our knives and forks. And I felt rather sympathy, kind of a sympathy with those poor Pharisees when they chided the disciples for eating with unwashed hands. But that was the time Jesus said, it isn't the germs that go in from outside, it's the thoughts you have inside. And we found several times, through our stupidity and our ignorance, we ate things we shouldn't eat. We never touched lettuce. That would give you amoebic dysentery immediately. And but one place they said we got wonderful strawberries for dessert, and we ate them. And that very night we addressed all the 0.4 liters in Cairo. And they were telling us to be cautious and careful about what we eat. And they said especially strawberries. If you eat any strawberries here, you will just get amoebic dysentery just as sure as fate. And there we were, just filled with the strawberries. So we said, Lord, I'll just keep our thoughts and everything okay, and we were all okay. But I've often told friends that my being here tonight is a miracle. For if you go out to the cemetery in Des Moines, where my parents' bodies lie, you'll find also the grave of little Glenn Clark, aged 6 weeks. Well, you'll say that's kind of a joke of some kind that he's buried there, but as a matter of fact, Glenn Clark is buried there. My father married a very healthy woman, a young woman, in 1870, and they had a baby, and she died of childbirth fever, and 6 weeks later, the little Glenn died. 12 years later, father had married a very frail, lovely woman, and she had 6 children, and we lived. Now, I was born 12 years after the other Glenn died, and my life was saved by a man that I never saw. He never even came to America. His name was Pasteur. And when he went into a hospital and saw where 7 women had died in adjacent cots, all of childbirth fever, all treated by the same doctor, he said every one of those could have been saved, and they laughed him to scorn. But he finally won out, and I am here because of that. I also can say this, that a great many wonderful things have happened because not of Pasteur, but because of Jesus. And Jesus went farther than these things. He took out these angers and fears, and then wonderful things began to happen. Well, a boy came to McAllister College and came out on our football field, the kind of a boy I didn't like to have on the team, because I got my boys to get rid of their angers and their fears, and taught them that if you want to travel far and fast, you must travel light, you must throw out the ballast. And here was a fellow full of ballast. The next winter he came into my office and he said, there's something wrong with my life. I always thought athletes had to be tough, and the tougher the athlete, the better the athlete. But I found the finest boys in college were the ones that threw the weights the farthest and ran the fastest. And I asked the captain what the big idea was, and he said, well, we believe here that if you want to travel far and fast, you must travel light. Throw out the ballast. Well, he said, I'm full of ballast. Well, I said, all right, let's take him, throw it out the window. And I went into a little dissertation on him, how good things, to him, on how bad things are often good things in the wrong place. Just accumulate all the dust and dirt in a barn, and but if you sweep it out and give it to the gardener, he takes it out and plows it under and creates a great harvest. And I said, if you keep ambition just for yourself, it becomes selfishness. Keep love just for yourself, it becomes lust. And you keep thrift for yourself, and it becomes greed. And he said, well, he was full of garbage. So I opened the window and I tossed it out and came back, and he grabbed me by the hand, and I said, I don't know if you got what I was trying to do. And he said, yeah, I think I did. I think I did. And he seized me by the hand, and I thought he'd never let go. Well, I was, then he said, thanks, Coach, and they disappeared down the hall. That night I said, I'm going to see the basketball team play tonight. We've lost all our games, but we're going to play the champions of the state, and they're worth the price of admission. They have 2 all-state players that are simply marvelous. They'll probably beat us 57-7. Well, sure enough, down the court came that team, nobody able to stop them. And under this basket, our basket, was this young man. Had been in my room that day, and I didn't know he'd made the team. Suddenly shot between the players, intercepted the ball. I can't hear again. And dribbled down the field and made a basket. Now, can you, if I shout louder? I believe I'll have to ask you to come up and fill those back seats there.
I think we had to do that last year. Yeah. Even without a microphone, people could hear when we were on the center. A little closer.
I don't want this thing here. What's it here for? Well, let's help some. Oh, I'm sorry that some of you didn't hear tonight. I've come 3,000 miles to speak, and some of you have come 1,000 miles to hear, and now I will just have to ask the Lord to adjust these things. I'm no good at mechanics. I turn that over to other folks entirely, and so I'm always, you folks work it out. And so, well, there we are. And this basketball, when the game ended that night, the championship team had made 21 points, and Ray single-handed made 23 points. Now, he wasn't a good basketball player, just mediocre, but he was right on the beam that night. And I overheard some boys at the big dual meet we were holding against North Dakota University say, I never saw anyone change in 3 months like Ray has. They elected him captain of the track team for the next year, and he became the all-around champion track athlete. He made the all-state football team. But the change in him was a spiritual change. The boys and girls said if they could just look into his face as they went through the hall, their whole day would be set straight. They elected him president of the YMCA. He made the best president they ever had. And when he graduated, they said he was the toughest boy that ever came to the college and the finest that ever graduated. He came to my office before he left, and he said something big happened to me. Something was taken off of me about 3 years ago when I came in this room. Everything's gone wonderfully since then, my athletics, my social life, and my studies. And then he paused in the door and he said in a voice that I'll never forget, but there's a big barn to clean. There's a big barn to clean. I went to the University of Wisconsin to give a series of talks there to the YM and the YW, and when Saturday afternoon came, they said the track team has stolen you. And we had to readjust the program. And when I went into the new field house, 100 boys in white suits sitting there on benches, and Coach Jones introduced me as the greatest authority in America on putting power, psychological power, as he called it, into athletes. I wondered where he got the idea, but he went on to tell them that he'd watched the McAllister boys at the Drake relays, and there's something about them that emanated from them that he was always been eager to have his boys catch. When I got through, a handsome young man, slightly bow-legged, came up and he took me by the hand and he said, I want to get that. And I thought he'd never let go of my hand. And I said, if you want it hard enough, you'll get it. When I left the field house, I looked back, and I was about 2 blocks away, and I could see Coach Jones and that young man. Eyes followed me as clear as St. Paul, it seemed to me. About 4 weeks later, I saw in the paper the Big Ten indoor field meet will be held tomorrow, and the championship lies between Ohio, Illinois, and Iowa. And the next day, the paper said the surprise of the meet was the way Wisconsin ran away with the meet, led by a little bow-legged chap they couldn't stop. Now, we have found getting things in harmony, wonderful things happen. Get rid of these angers and fears, and it gives in a trust and a peace and a calm that lets everything work out. I think I'll tell a little episode, a couple of episodes before I close. One of them is a man named Ben Johnson, lives out in California. Some may know him. And he was president of a big lumber company. And he's used me, as many other companies have, as a sort of on the board of his spiritual directors. And he'd often phone me from any part of the country when they're having a special conference. And I was a man at Vincent Peale's church giving a series and was getting ready to retire one night at the Prince George Hotel when a phone rang, and it was Ben Johnson from California. He said the doctors said he had cancer, and could I possibly come out and see him? I wrote him that I was very sorry that I couldn't make it because my schedule is all full and ending up with a trip to Hawaii. But when we started on this journey across the continent, the Browns were driving in their car. When we reached Cheyenne, I said, we're not going to be able to reach San Francisco the morning of the day we were going to fly that night. So we'll hardly have to stop at some little town this side of San Francisco, but close enough to easily get in there in time to catch that plane. Now, I know that Ben Johnson lives at some place. I think it's Stockton. And we could just plan to spend the night there, and that would just be a blessing to him. And so I called up Stockton, and the telephone operator said, there's no Ben Johnson in Stockton. So I said, now the Lord will have to furnish us the name of that town where he lives, or I'll not be able to reach him. And isn't that just too bad? The next day we rode 600 miles and stopped a little town in Nevada about 6 o'clock, and I said, I'm tired of this constant travel here and all this. I'd like a change, a variety. And we've been talking all about spiritually all the time. I think I'd like to go and see a movie. A little town and only one little movie house, and a different movie each night, and they had a very nice movie going to be next Friday, but we were going to stop till next Friday. And the only thing that night was Roughshod, a Western. and which I wouldn't recommend to anyone. And I said, well, I'm in the mood to go, and I think I'll go. So we all went. In the movie, about halfway through, three lovely young ladies got on one of these wagons, cowboy wagons, and what do you call them? Stagecoach. And there's such ancient history, I'm even losing the language of that age. Although I used to ride on them myself when I was a boy in Wyoming. And they said, I said, where are you going? And the young lady said, we're going to Sonora. And I said, Sonora, that's the name of the town where Ben Jonson lives. I had to come to a little out-of-the-way crazy movie to find that, but because we've been on the beam, even the Lord led me. Well, you know, there's some old biblical character said that if I go to Sheol, if I go to hell, I'll find the Lord there. So you go to the movie, the cheapest kind of a movie, sometimes you'll find the Lord there if you're in tune on the inside. Well, then when I got back, it was 9 o'clock at our place, but it was only 8 o'clock at his, and we phoned, and his wife said he just danced up and down for a whole 24 hours with joy that we were coming. And we came, and he didn't know that Roland Brown was marvelous in healing, and we had a prayer, and then we went in, flew over to Hawaii. Then we got a long-distance phone, clear halfway across the ocean. Ben Jonson had gone into San Francisco, bought a book, Recovery, about Roland Brown, and he is eager to see more of him as well as of me. And he asked when we would come back, and he'd meet us at his airplane field, which he did. And we had another prayer. Months went by, and then we got a letter that the doctor had now examined him and found the cancer was cured. We went to a movie, found Sonora. Wonderful things happened. There may seem little or no logic, but there's a tremendous logic. A logic that could be beyond the mystery of man to explain. In obeying those unseen intangibles as the reals, the most marvelous things in all the world. Well, I'd like to close this by saying that there's way back behind this thing is anger and fear, is old selfishness, ego. You might say he's the grandfather of the whole family, if the anger is the father and the fear the mother. I got rid of my fears by walking. When I thought I was going to die one night, I just said, all right, Lord, I'm your man. I'm going to do everything from now on in your honor and glory. I'm your man if you want to take me to heaven right now. But remember this, if anything happens to me, it'll be your hard luck and not mine, so you just go ahead. And when I came back, that ailment, which is a palpitation of the heart that I'd had for 10 years, vanished away, and it's 30 years have gone by, and it's never come back since. Mrs. Alice Freeman Palmer was the president of Wellesley, a young woman of 26, and one day someone asked her, weren't you ever snubbed? She said, oh yes, often, but I never was there. When you take your self out, you see you lose your fears and the angers. When I was at Grinnell College, I played left halfback on the football team. The right halfback weighed 200 pounds. I weighed 135. He could hit the line harder. He could run faster, dodge better. He could do everything better. Why was I on the team? Well, because I could follow my interference so closely that they couldn't always find me. And when we came to play Drake University in the great Drake Stadium in Des Moines, Iowa, my hometown, my father and mother and 3 sisters and kid brother all in the grandstand watching. And I guess I must have shown off a little bit, or tried to. At any rate, between halves, the coach said the only one that's gaining consistently today is Clark. So the second half, give him the ball every other play. And so when the second half started, I was making all the consistent gains, but I wasn't getting any credit for it. Because they never could see me. The crowd couldn't. I was always hidden with interference. But the captain, even when he's thrown for a loss, they would cheer him because he was out there dodging around where all could see him. So on the next play, I resolved I was going to leave my interference and go out where Mama and Papa could see me. And I left the interference, and my Mama described what happened more vividly and accurately than the sporting editor of the Des Moines Register did the next morning. She said, I thought it was just terrible the way those 22 great big wicked men jumped on my poor little boy all at the same time. And that's exactly the way it felt. And the great lesson I learned was this. The moment you put yourself into the picture, you get bumped. But if you can follow the captain so closely that those watching you from in front can't see anyone but the captain, you can keep on going as long as the captain wants you to go. So tonight, just to get started, and now I throw out that thought. Let's pray that that self can be just subordinated to the great Christ self. Anger could be thrown out the window and let love come in. Fear can go out and let perfect trust come in. And we'll just ask the Lord to do a little spiritual surgery on us tonight, if necessary, and fill us with His Spirit. I want to say that when we first come together, we're a heterogeneous group from all over the nation. I found out someday was how many states are represented here. But after we've all slept, most of us under the same roof or nearby roofs, and come together tomorrow morning in that meditation period, you're going to find tremendous power flowing through. And when the prayer groups start tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night, I anticipate a power that and a unity that we just don't feel tonight. For Jesus said, where two or three agree, and that word agree comes from the same Greek word our word symphony comes from, whatsoever they ask in my name will be done. So we're not asking for any great, impossible things tonight. But believe me, before this camp goes very much farther, you're going to find prayers answered and the promises of Jesus fulfilled far beyond your expectation. Let us bow our heads and our hearts in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for Jesus and the wonderful teachings that make us stand in awe more and more. The more we lean upon mere philosophy, the more amazed we are at the power in these hidden words of Jesus. The more we open to Thee, we begin to see that all things are possible with Thee, and we aren't so amazed and don't stand in wonder so much as in gratitude. So with our hearts open in gratitude, Father, we're asking for You to just let a little a vacuum cleaner work on us tonight and during our slumber time, and You just fill us with Your Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name we ask this. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this message from the CFO Classics Library. If you would like to listen to more messages from the library, please visit our website at cfoclassicslibrary.org. Or if you would like more information about the camps farthest out or would like to find a camp near you, please visit their website at cfonorthamerica.org.